and welcome back to the CyberSec Migrant, and welcome to our Christmas special. If you're watching this and it's Christmas Day, and you're taking time out of your Christmas schedule, or you're during your holidays taking time to watch this, I want to wish you a very, very Merry Christmas, joys of the season, and looking forward to a prosperous 2026 in the year ahead. Today, we're going to do something slightly different. Christmas episodes usually are about celebration, gratitude, victories. But for this year, I want to do something different because it just doesn't feel okay to do just a highlight reel. Because the truth is, 2025 wasn't a highlight year. It was a year of several consequences, particularly in the cybersecurity industry. So if 2024 was the year organizations talked about getting serious about cybersecurity, 2025 is the year the bill came due. It's the year it was stamped, it was escalated. And that bill was addressed to everyone, startups, huge conglomerates, governments. And this was the year that cybercrime stopped feeling abstract and started feeling systemic, because the board stopped asking. It's not if a breach is going to happen, but they started to ask things like, how fast can we recover when we have a breach? So today's episode, we're going to be talking about this moment in our industry as a year of cyber reckoning. So wherever you're listening from, either you're driving home for the holidays, getting off your Christmas dinner, or hiding from your family, conversations about fixing the Wi-Fi or setting up the new printer, thank you for spending this time with me. And now let's talk about what really happened in 2025 in the industry of cybersecurity. What broke, what evolved, and what we cannot afford to ignore heading into 2026. First things first, I think one of the biggest things that happened in 2025 was that cybercrime became industrialized. We began to see a risk-based economy. Let's talk about some numbers that define the year. At the end of 2025, so in about a week, it is projected that the cost of cybercrime to the global economy is going to be about 10.5 trillion with a T US dollars. Think on that for a second. If you exclude the two largest economies in the world, so China and the US, every single country in the world has a GDP less than $10 trillion. So the cost of cybercrime was bigger than the GDP of every country in the world except two. And that is huge, because that is not cyber risk. That's an entire economic sector. But at the organizational level, what are we talking about? What are the figures we have? At the organizational level, we found out that the average cost of a breach climbed to roughly $4.35 million per incident, give or take. And for several years, analysts had warned that this was coming. But 2025 is the year that that warning became reality. Cybercrime didn't just grow, it actually became professionalized, because we saw the rise of certain things like structured ransomware as a service ecosystems. We saw a clear specialization between access brokers, exploit developers, and negotiators for all of these things. We saw SLAs, escalation paths, and yes, even customer service portals for ransomware and cybercrime as a service. So at this point where we are, governments and regulators have no choice, because this is no longer a company problem, it's a systemic economic risk. So that's when cybersecurity stops being a discretionary spend and becomes a mandatory resilience investment for those businesses. And for the professionals who are listening, this is the moment that your career market permanently changes, because security, risk, compliance, identity, resilience, these aren't nice to have things anymore. They're the key things you have to remain relevant in the industry. They are your infrastructure. Now let's talk about some of the big lows of this year. We had the rise of enterprise-grade adversaries, because that was what the story was. We had attacks on a highly efficient scale everywhere. In mid-2025, for example, there was one name that dominated all the reports on ransomware around the globe, and it was Qilin. Threat intelligence showed that Qilin was becoming the most active ransomware group globally by June. It executed 81 attacks in a single month of June, a nearly 50% increase in activity. Now that wasn't chaos, that was precision, because their targeting focused on what? High value institutions, including major data theft incident involving a Swiss bank. And that ransomware was optimized for maximum leverage, not noise. So what's the lesson? We aren't fighting opportunists anymore. We are facing people that think about this as a strategic business, and we have to think about them. Another name that was very popular throughout this year was the name Clop. It was familiar, but even a strategy that was even further refined. Clop was focused on supply chain as a weapon. In 2025, Clop exploited a critical Oracle e-business suite vulnerability with a CVSS score of 9.8. And the evidence suggests that those attackers had months of undetected access before they were actually discovered. Some of the victims of Clop include Alliance UK, the Washington Post, Envoy Air. And for them, it wasn't about the volume of how many people could we attack, how many people could we, exploit. It was about positioning themselves. And Clop continues to demonstrate that supply chain are the highest ROI attack vectors. Because if you can compromise one trusted system, you inherit hundreds of downstream victims. That's why supply chain attacks have been really, really growing. Which means that today, if you want to defend actively, defend effectively, you need a deep third-party risk management solution or policy in place. You need continuous vendor monitoring, and you need proactive threat hunting, not reactive alerting. And that thing that happened this year was the human factor. It's still undefeated. Because we have an example from DoorDash. In late 2025, DoorDash disclosed a breach that wasn't caused by malware, it wasn't caused by a 0-day, but social engineering. And that's how technology isn't always the full story. Technology alone is never the full story. Because what happened was a hacker impersonated a trusted partner, and because they were able to socially engineer it, an employee gave that hacker granted that hacker access. And in that process, sensitive internal customer data was exposed. Of course, we were told that there's no payment info and no passwords. But what information did they get? They got names, they got email addresses, they got delivery addresses, all PII. And that's more than enough to fuel targeted follow-on attacks. And this is the uncomfortable truth that happens especially with the human side of things. The more advanced our defenses become, the more attackers exploit our trust. Because phishing isn't just emails anymore. It's conversations, it's workflows, it's social engineering wrapped in a business context. That is why tools like extended detection and response, identity analytics, security awareness training, they are no longer optional for businesses today. You have to actively do these things to be able to survive. They are your survival mechanism.
Hey CyberSec Migrant listeners, if you're enjoying the show, help us spread the word. Share the CyberSec Migrant podcast with your friends, your colleagues, and your network. It's the best way to help others discover our awesome content and to join the conversation. And don't forget to follow us on your favorite podcast platform. We're available on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Amazon Music, iHeartRadio, and any other place where you get your podcast, so you never miss an episode. And do hit that like and subscribe button on YouTube. Your support helps us keep bringing you more valuable content, insights, and stories, and all these tips from the world of cybersecurity. And thank you for tuning in. And now, let's get back to today's episode.
But again, it wasn't all doom and gloom in 2025. There were some highs that I would like to really, celebrate. First, data resilience became a good thing. Because again, while the attackers were professionalizing their attacks, so did the response to these attacks. One of the highlights of the year 2025 was that DORA became law. Because on January 17, 2025, the EU's Digital Operational Resilience Act, also known as DORA, it became enforceable. And it's not just another compliance checkbox by the EU. It's a philosophical shift from prevention to assumed failure, from security controls to business continuity, from can we stop these attacks to can we survive these attacks. So you see how the mind shift has shifted. Now organizations are required to demonstrate that they can continue critical operations during outages, they can recover within defined time frames, and they can manage third-party risk explicitly. So in plain English, downtime is no longer acceptable just because it was caused by a cyber incident. And that single regulation, DORA, has shaped how boards think about cybersecurity. And it's already influencing global policy even beyond Europe. Another big thing that happened in 2025 and continues to happen, which I'm particularly happy about, is that Zero Trust has become the default. Because now, in 2025, as we speak, security architecture is finally catching up with reality. Because Zero Trust is no longer aspirational for most companies. It is the standard. One of the things that drove this standardization, if you will, of Zero Trust as the baseline. Because perimeter-based security has collapsed under solutions like remote work, like cloud-native systems, like SaaS sprawl with identity-centric access. So all of these things made it imperative that Zero Trust was going to be the new model, the new path to follow. Because with Zero Trust, you verify explicitly, you assume breach, you enforce least privilege, and it becomes the only model that made sense. It's not just because it's trendy, not because it's a buzzword, but because it's absolutely necessary and crucial to you as an entity surviving a cyber attack. Every company, every entity today is beginning to build in Zero Trust as a foundation, which is a big, big win for the industry in 2025. But of course, to make Zero Trust workable at scale, decisions had to accelerate the adoption of extended detection and response platforms, so XDR, like I spoke about earlier. So now organizations are consolidating signals from endpoints, from identity, from email, and even from cloud workloads. So XDR means that there's a reduced alert fatigue, there's collapse detection timelines, and against enterprise-grade attackers like Clop or Qilin means speed is absolutely crucial to your survival. And the biggest thing, XDR gave us as defenders something that we have been missing: context. Because it helps us to contextualize all those things that the attackers are doing and gives us a bit more of an insight into what's happening next. But of course, despite all of these highs and lows throughout the year, there were some big signals throughout the year. I call them strategic signals. Most of them revolve around quantum and AI and the next curve of cybersecurity. And that was one of the biggest signals of the year 2025. I think one of the quieter, more important signals of 2025 was the growing seriousness around quantum risk. Because for the very first time, post-quantum cryptography stopped being future talk and began to enter strategic roadmaps. I remember myself, I was on a panel a couple of times talking about quantum risk and post-quantum cryptography and how the future of the industry has to include plans to have security that's quantum resistant. Because today we have this recognition that RSA and ECC won't survive once the quantum era arrives. So that thought has elevated quantum safe security into real specialization, especially for advanced practitioners. So people are actually delving into how can we find solutions that are safe and quantum resistant. But at the same time as this is happening, AI continues to amplify even the most fragile part of our systems: human behavior. Because we know now that AI-powered social engineering isn't coming. It's already here. And it's really going to move faster than even training programs can keep up. And this is why identity, behavioral analytics, and resilience planning are more and more critical than ever before. I was watching the news last night, and there was a snowstorm somewhere in Canada, and there were images of that snowstorm online. And the reporter was asking people in the airport terminal, which of these images looks real and which of them is AI generated. And people could not tell the difference between an AI generated image and a real image. Of course, some were obviously AI, but the large bulk of them, there was no difference. So AI-powered social engineering is coming. It's here, and it's going to actually be a big part of what we have to think about going into the future. So what's the real lesson of 2025? If there's one lesson 2025 forces us to accept, it is this: breaches are inevitable, but collapse is optional. They made us begin to realize that we are no longer going to have a mindset of if we get breached. It's when we get breached. Are we going to be ready? The organizations that survived this year, they were not the ones that had the most tools, but they were the ones that had what? Clear recovery plans, executive alignment, architecture that assumed compromise, and people trained to respond and not panic. Those are so critical for any successful enterprise to be able to deal with a cyber incident or a breach. You've got to have a clear plan about what do you do to recover your operations as they should be. Do you have executive buy-in? Does your board align with this vision? Does your architecture work to meet those recovery plans? Does it assume compromise? And is it architected as such to respond to that compromise? And most importantly, are your people trained to respond to that compromise? Are they trained to respond to that recovery? Are they trained to not panic? Because sometimes you find out that when an incident does happen, one of the first things that people are not trained to do is they begin to panic. And that is absolutely crucial, that you don't panic. And of course, compliance, architecture, and culture finally began to converge and point in the same direction. So, as we step into 2026, the question isn't whether attacks will get worse. They will. The question is not whether attacks are going to happen. They will. The question is not what's going to happen next year. Attacks are going to happen. The real question is this: are we, as cybersecurity professionals, as leaders, as organizations, are we willing to design systems that bend instead of break? And if you're building a career in cybersecurity, this shift is your opportunity. Because the truth is, resilience isn't the future of cybersecurity, it is the future of leadership. So thank you for spending this part of your Christmas with me, CyberSec Migrant. Either you've been listening all year or you've discovered the show, I genuinely appreciate you. Thank you for coming on this ride with us throughout the year 2025. There's been a lot that we've been able to learn, and I promise you that in the coming year, in 2026, we're going to keep doing more of this, bringing you more awesome content that's going to keep you abreast of what's happening in the cybersecurity industry. It's going to help you as you look to build your career in cybersecurity. And if this episode resonated with you, can I ask that you share with someone who needs to hear it? Leave me a comment down below. Let me know, what was your cybersecurity high of 2025? Was there a low of 2025? Let's start that conversation. And I also want to ask, if you made it this far, consider subscribing to the channel and also hitting that notification bell so you don't miss any new episodes as they drop. And if you can, send this out to your friends as well. Anyone you know who's looking to get involved in cybersecurity. Send them our podcast, send them our YouTube channel, let them follow us, stay in touch, and we would love to hear more and more about what you think. You can also find us on our social media platforms. We're active on LinkedIn, on Facebook, on Instagram, and on Twitter, or X, or whatever it's called these days. Let us know what you think, because for 2025 and cybersecurity, the reckoning is not over. It's just begun. But the good thing also is that our ability to adapt is also growing. So I want you to stay safe, stay curious, and I will see you in 2026.